It began on a Thursday morning that felt no different from any other, or so I thought. The sky was dull over Surrey, and the streets were damp from the night's drizzle. I had just dropped off our daughter, Lila, at St. Agnes Primary and was heading to the local Tesco to pick up some groceries. It was the sort of ordinary routine that fills a life, until something breaks it beyond repair. I loaded the basket with the usual, milk, eggs, fruit for Lila's lunchbox, and Richard's preferred cereal, the one he claimed helped him think clearer. I moved to the self-checkout, tapped our joint debit card, and waited for the familiar beep. Declined. I frowned, tried again, slower this time. Declined. My chest tightened. That had never happened before. Not once in 12 years of marriage. I was sure there was enough money. There always was. Embarrassed, I apologized to the woman behind me, left the trolley, and walked briskly to the car. Rain began to dot the windscreen as I sat in the driver's seat, heart pounding. I called the bank. After the usual security checks, the representative on the other end hesitated before she spoke. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Hammond, but the joint account has been frozen. The request came from Mr. Hammond earlier this week." I sat in silence, not even blinking. Frozen. By Richard. Without telling me. Without even a warning. I drove home slowly, replaying every moment from the past few days in my head. Had we argued? No. Had he seemed distant? Maybe. But Richard always had a way of burying things beneath polite smiles and shallow kisses. Our house on Foxley Lane stood quiet, its red brick soaked from the morning rain. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. Everything looked the same, yet suddenly foreign. Richard had already left for the office in Guildford before Lila even woke up. He'd said he had an early meeting with a client. But now, that felt like another lie. I paced the kitchen, then the hallway, unable to sit still. I texted Richard. No reply. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. My fingers trembled. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused, shaken, almost humiliated. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Emma. Saw Richard at the Ivy last night. He didn't see me. He wasn't alone. I stared at the screen. The Ivy. That was our place. We had celebrated our 10th anniversary there. I typed back quickly. Who was he with? Emma replied instantly. Some blonde woman. Younger. She was laughing at everything he said. They looked close. Too close. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My fingers felt like stone. I wandered into Richard's study, not knowing what I was looking for, but hoping to find something, anything, that made sense. That's when I saw the envelope. It was lying neatly on his desk, my name written in his handwriting. No salutation. No warmth. Inside, I found a single sheet. A notice informing me that Richard had moved all his personal assets into a separate account and had begun proceedings for separation. Effective immediately. It was cold. Precise. Like a contract ending, not a marriage. I dropped into the leather chair, tears stinging my eyes but refusing to fall. My gaze fell to another piece of paper, barely tucked beneath the notice. A receipt. From a Mayfair jeweler. A diamond ring. Purchased last week. And suddenly, everything aligned. The woman. The secrecy. The frozen account. The lies. The ring wasn't for me. That's when something snapped inside me, not in defeat, but in resolve. Richard Hammond thought he could discard me like an old coat. Thought he could build a new life on the ruins of mine. But what he didn't know was that I had more than silence in me. I had a storm. And it was coming. The next morning, I stood outside Richard's office building in Guildford. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just waited. The receptionist had told me he had a meeting at 9, so I arrived at 8:30 and stayed hidden across the street, watching. At precisely 8:45, I saw him. Tall, confident, in his grey tailored suit, looking every bit the successful architect he loved to pretend he still was. But what caught my eye wasn't Richard, it was her. She was walking beside him. Blonde, with waves that fell just below her shoulders, draped in a camel trench coat and laughing at something he had said. She looked no older than 28, and far too comfortable around a married man. They didn't touch. But they didn't need to. Their closeness said it all. I watched them enter the glass doors, my hands clenched in fists. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from our daughter's school app. Lila's class had been assigned a project about family heritage. The irony punched me square in the chest. I drove straight to Mayfair. If he had bought her a ring, I needed to see it. I needed confirmation, not for closure. There was no room for that anymore, but for ammunition. I arrived at the jeweler's, a discreet little boutique nestled between a vintage tailor and a wine merchant. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of leather and lavender struck me. A man in a navy waistcoat approached with a polished smile. "Can I help you, madam?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm here about a purchase made last week by Mr. Richard Hammond." He hesitated, ever so slightly. "I'm afraid we don't usually disclose details of private transactions." I slipped out my phone. "I have the receipt." I showed it to him. "The proof." His expression shifted. He nodded, then disappeared behind a velvet curtain. A moment later, he returned with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Not just any ring. A 5-carat emerald-cut diamond set in a platinum band. Elegant. Expensive. And utterly soulless. "She came in with him," the man said softly, almost as if against his will. "Chose it herself." He looked proud. My throat tightened. So that was it. She wasn't just some passing fancy. He was replacing me. Quietly. Methodically. With someone who knew the price of beauty, but not the cost of betrayal. I walked out of that shop, not with tears in my eyes, but fire in my lungs. I would not let this become the story of the woman who was replaced. No. This would be the story of the woman who rose from the ashes of her own life and set fire to the lies that tried to bury her. Back home, I began my own kind of investigation. Richard thought he was clever. But he'd underestimated the wife who had kept his accounts in order, memorized every password, and packed his suitcase for a decade. I started with our shared cloud storage. Hidden in an innocuous folder titled, Projects, House Build, I found photographs. Dozens of them. Holidays I never knew happened. Trips to Rome, to Prague, even a skiing lodge in the Alps. Always the same two figures, Richard and the blonde. I recognized her now. Her name was Imogen Clark. A junior architect who had interned under Richard last year. I'd met her once. She had complimented my blouse. My stomach twisted. I scrolled further. Screenshots of hotel bookings. Dinner reservations. Flight confirmations. He hadn't just left me. He'd been building a parallel life. And he'd paid for it, with my money. I sat there, the betrayal seeping into my bones, slow and cold. He had frozen the joint account. He had taken everything we built together, and invested it into someone else. But what he didn't know, what he would never suspect, was that I had one account he never touched. A separate savings I had kept from the early years of our marriage, before he convinced me to merge everything. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Enough to start again. Enough to fight back. Enough to destroy him from within. He thought I would stay quiet. He thought I would crumble. But now, the rules had changed. And I would make sure Richard Hammond knew exactly what it felt like to be left with nothing. The next day, I went to the bank. I met with a private banker I had known for years. A quiet man named Oliver, who had always greeted me with a subtle nod and polite smile. He knew the old me, the loyal wife, the diligent co-signer, the woman who never questioned her husband's financial decisions. But today, I walked in differently. I wasn't that woman anymore. "Mrs. Hammond," he said as he led me to a quiet office. "What can I help you with today?" "I'd like to discuss the freezing of our joint account," I said, crossing my legs and holding his gaze. "And I'd like to know exactly what my husband has done with our funds." Oliver looked uncomfortable, but I pushed forward. I had my documents. Proof that I had as much right to that account as Richard did. An hour later, I had everything I needed. It turned out Richard had diverted thousands, tens of thousands, into a new account. One under his name only. He'd disguised the transfers under project codes and fake invoices, all billed through his architectural firm. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took my evidence and left. That night, I lay awake in bed. Not in sorrow, but in strategy. I stared at the ceiling and let every insult, every bruise to my pride, every lie he ever fed me soak into my skin like armor. Then I planned. I began by calling Louise, my solicitor. She was sharp, discreet, and didn't blink when I said I wanted to file for divorce and pursue financial fraud. She gave me a list. Documents to gather. Steps to take. I followed each one like clockwork. I moved quickly. Quietly. I secured my savings account, had my name removed from his firm's liability documents, and contacted Lila's school to update emergency contacts. I even withdrew my name from the property deed of the holiday home in Cornwall, the one Richard had secretly mortgaged to fund his escapades. By the end of the week, I was invisible on paper. Legally, I didn't exist in his life anymore. And he didn't even know it. But that wasn't enough. I needed him to feel it. To taste the loss. So, I planned an event. A gathering of friends, family, former colleagues. I told them I had news to share. Everyone assumed it was an anniversary announcement or a vow renewal. I booked the same venue Richard had used for our 10th wedding anniversary, a stately Georgian manor in Surrey. I sent out elegant invitations. Even Richard's mother RSVP'd. And yes, I invited Richard. I knew he'd be curious. I also knew he wouldn't resist the urge to gloat, thinking I was somehow crawling back. On the night of the event, I wore red. A deep, dramatic red that clung to my waist and bared my shoulders. The kind of dress a woman wears when she's not asking for attention, she's demanding it. As guests arrived, the chatter was lively. Music played, champagne flowed, and Richard, late as always, finally entered the room. With Imogen. She clung to his arm like a silk scarf in the wind, eyes scanning for attention. But the moment she stepped inside, she froze. Because on the projector behind me were photographs. Not of me. Not of us. But of them. Every image from his secret trips. Every screenshot of their bookings. Every receipt paid for with my money. The room fell silent. Gasps. Murmurs. And Richard turned grey. "Surprise," I said calmly. "Consider this my farewell gift." He tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No need, Richard. The divorce papers are with my solicitor. You'll receive them tomorrow morning, along with a financial audit of your business practices." "Oh, and your mother?" "She's seen the photos." Imogen let go of his arm. She turned and walked straight out of the room. Richard followed, but not before looking back at me, eyes wide, lips parted, like a man watching his world collapse brick by brick. I stood there, surrounded by silence, sipping champagne. I didn't smile. But I felt power in every breath. He had thought he froze me out. But I was just getting started. The fallout from the party spread faster than I imagined. By the next morning, whispers were circulating in every corner of our social circle. Messages flooded my phone, some apologetic, others shocked, a few confessing they had suspected something was off for months. But what mattered most was silence. Richard's silence. Not a call. Not a message. He'd gone to ground, and I knew exactly why. The night after the party, I returned home to find his study door wide open. Strange. Richard never left it unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it, papers stacked, books arranged, files scattered. Except now, I looked with different eyes. I knew where he kept his secrets. Behind the bookshelf, there was a small compartment. It used to be a hiding spot for birthday gifts, until it became something far more dangerous, a vault for his lies. I pulled it open. Inside were several flash drives, a leather-bound notebook, and a mobile phone I had never seen before. I took them all. I spent hours combing through the data. Most of it confirmed what I already knew: he'd been embezzling from his own company. Using shell accounts. Falsifying invoices. But there was more. He'd used my name. My signature. He'd dragged me into his web without consent, attaching my identity to fraudulent contracts. If this ever went to court and I hadn't taken action, I could have been ruined alongside him. That changed everything. Now, this wasn't just personal. It was war. I handed everything to Louise. She took one look at the documents and said, "He's going down." Hard. Then came the next blow. Richard's firm, once known for high-end developments and sleek renovations, was under audit. One of his former employees, a quiet young architect named Callum, came forward with additional proof of misconduct. Apparently, Richard had refused to pay him for months. The moment Callum saw the photos from the party, he reached out to me. We met at a small cafe in Bath. I recognized him instantly, polite, nervous, with a satchel full of evidence. Emails, contracts, even voice recordings of Richard threatening staff. "You were the only one who was ever kind," he told me. "If I'd known what he was doing to you." I nodded. "You know now," I said, taking the files. The picture was complete. Richard was a fraud. A thief. A liar. And now, he was going to be exposed. But there was still one piece left. Imogen. She had vanished from his side after the party. Deleted her social media. Quit her job at the gallery. No one had seen her in over a week. But I had my ways. I found her. She was staying with a friend in Brighton. I called her from a private number. At first, she didn't answer. The second time, she did. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice brittle. "To talk," I replied. "Not as enemies. As women." A pause. Then, "Fine. 1 hour. Public place." We met at a seaside cafe. It was raining, the skies grey, the waves thrashing like they shared my rage. She arrived in sunglasses and a coat too big for her. She looked exhausted. "Hollow. Why are you here?" she asked. "Because I need to know," I said, leaning forward. "Was any of it real? Or were you playing him the way he played us?" She looked away. And then she laughed. Not in amusement, but in bitterness. "He told me you were cold. Controlling. That he was trapped," she muttered. "He made me believe I was rescuing him." "You weren't," I said sharply. "You were helping him destroy me." She rubbed her temples. "He lied to both of us. I thought I loved him. But now I see, he only ever loved himself." I slid a photo across the table, one of the forged contracts. Her signature was there too. "You're in this. Whether you like it or not." Her eyes widened. "I didn't sign that." "But he used your name." And just like that, her face changed. The realization hit her like a slap. "I have emails," she whispered. "He told me to send them to a private inbox. I didn't ask why." "Then it's time you did." She looked up at me. And for the first time, she nodded. Not as my rival, but as an ally. The truth was no longer ours to carry in silence. It was about to roar through every courtroom, every boardroom, every corner of his life. Richard had started this fire. But I was going to be the one to watch it burn. Richard finally resurfaced. Not with remorse. Not with apologies. But with a solicitor. The letter arrived in a thick envelope, hand-delivered to my door as if it carried royal weight. It was cold, clinical, and saturated with arrogance. He was suing for a divorce. Claiming emotional distress. Alleging I had damaged his reputation with the public scene at the party. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because there, written in black and white, was everything I needed, proof that he was still living in his delusion. He had no idea what I had on him. I brought the letter straight to Louise, who read it twice, then poured herself a brandy in the middle of the afternoon. "We're not just going to defend this," she said. "We're going to annihilate him." The next few weeks moved like a storm. We filed our response. Attached to it were sworn statements, bank records, copies of contracts, voice recordings, and detailed testimony from Imogen and Callum. Every thread, every lie he'd spun, laid bare in court-ready documentation. Richard must have expected silence. Compliance. Maybe even begging. What he got was a legal siege. When his new solicitor, some pompous man from a pricey London firm, called Louise to negotiate, she shut him down in under 5 minutes. "No deals," she said. "We're going to court." The date was set. And then, something remarkable happened. His own company turned on him. 2 partners resigned. Shareholders demanded an emergency meeting. Once my evidence started to circulate, they had no choice. By the end of the week, Richard was suspended as CEO. His assets were frozen. His accounts flagged. He tried to blame me. Claimed I forged the evidence. That I had it out for him. But it was no use. The truth didn't need to scream anymore. It whispered in every corner of the courtroom halls. The first hearing was a spectacle. Reporters were outside. Friends and enemies alike packed into the gallery. I walked in with my head high, Louise at my side, and Imogen sitting quietly in the back, no longer a rival, but a witness. Richard arrived late. Unshaven. Sweating. He didn't look like the man I'd once married. He looked like someone grasping at control that no longer existed. The judge was stern. And fair. She reviewed our counterclaim, fraud, financial abuse, emotional harm, and defamation. Louise delivered our opening statement with the precision of a scalpel. By the end of it, Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years. I said nothing. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any scream he could muster. But behind the courtroom drama, I was preparing something else. Something poetic. Richard had chosen the same weekend he proposed to me, 8 years ago, for the next hearing. I couldn't let that irony pass unmarked. So I made a decision. I rented a venue. I sent out invitations. No, not for a wedding. For a rebirth. A night of laughter, music, and power. A celebration not of an ending, but a beginning. Because for the first time in years, I didn't just feel free. I felt unstoppable. And the best part? Richard had no idea what was waiting for him on that same day. He thought this was about revenge. But I was about to show him. It was always about liberation. The evening arrived like a symphony, every note planned, every moment sharp with purpose. The venue was an old glass house in Richmond, transformed with soft golden lights, silk drapes, and the scent of white roses floating through the air. My guests began to arrive just as the sun dipped below the skyline, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. Friends. Colleagues. Women I'd met through support groups. Even a few of Richard's former allies who had quietly turned their backs on him. They all came to celebrate me. I wore a gown unlike anything I'd ever chosen before. Sleek, crimson, unapologetic. A sharp contrast to the pale, timid dresses I used to wear under Richard's watchful gaze. No veil. No chains. Just strength stitched into every seam. Louise greeted guests like a proud sister. Callum manned the music, spinning soul and jazz into the night air. And Imogen, impeccably dressed in navy, stood at the bar with a glass of champagne, watching me with a soft smile. You did it, she whispered as we hugged. No, I said. I started it. The speeches began. Nothing formal. Just toasts, one after the other, each voice stronger than the last. A colleague shared how I'd inspired her to leave a toxic relationship. Another said I taught her what boundaries looked like. A third simply raised her glass and said, to freedom. It should have been enough. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One more moment that hadn't arrived, yet. And then, like fate responding to a silent summons, my phone buzzed. A single text from Louise. He's seen the photos. I turned to the large screen behind the fountain. It lit up, image after image from the party, all over social media. My red dress. The laughter. The defiance. The headlines had already begun. Estranged wife throws lavish celebration while husband faces legal heat. It was perfect. Richard was probably at home, alone, watching his public image shatter in real time. But I wasn't done. I walked up to the MIC. Some of you know this evening wasn't planned on a whim. It marks something. The day someone once tried to ruin me, and failed. The crowd stilled. Glasses were lowered. Attention sharpened. I once built a life on someone else's terms. I poured my time, my money, my heart into a man who never saw me as his equal. Who thought his secrets, his lies, his arrogance could outlive the truth. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Not anymore. I reached for the envelope in my clutch. Held it high. This, I said, is a list of every woman he lied to, cheated on, manipulated. Most of them never knew the others existed. Until now. A gasp. I sent them all an invitation tonight. Some came. Some didn't. But they all know. I placed the envelope on the table beside the champagne tower. Justice is one thing. But solidarity. That's power. The crowd rose to their feet, not clapping, cheering. Because they understood. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The rest of the night blurred into something almost sacred. We danced. We laughed. We cried. And when midnight struck, I stood at the center of it all, not as a wife. Not as a victim. But as a woman reborn. I had no idea what the next court hearing would bring. But I no longer feared it. Because Richard had lost far more than a marriage. He'd lost the one person who once protected his secrets. Now, he stood exposed. And I stood in the light. The hearing was set for Monday morning at the High Court in central London. The air outside was crisp, sharp with late autumn wind as I stepped from the black cab. Louise walked beside me, calm but fierce, her suit tailored like armor. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Inside, the room was quiet, too quiet. Richard was already there, seated with his new barrister. His eyes met mine for a split second, and in that moment, I saw it. Not defiance. Not rage. But fear. His empire, once built on charm, intimidation, and silent compliance, had started to crumble, and he knew it. Imogen took her seat next to me, laptop open, files ready. This wasn't just about finances anymore. It had grown far beyond numbers and documents. It was about exposure. It was about truth. The judge entered, a woman with eyes like stone and patience worn thin. She flicked through our file, her brow twitching as she skimmed headlines, statements, and bank records. Louise began her opening with precision. She laid it all out. The discrepancies in the joint account. The unauthorized withdrawals. The luxurious spending on women with no trace of business relevance. The flat in Mayfair registered under a shell company. The hush payments. Richard squirmed. His barrister objected, weakly. The judge barely acknowledged him. Then came the witnesses. Not all of them were women. One was a former business partner, a man who admitted Richard had falsified figures in joint ventures. Another, a bank employee who noticed large, frequent transfers to private accounts in Switzerland. And finally, one of the women he had kept hidden for years. She sat in silence at first, her voice trembling, but her words cut clean when she finally spoke. He promised me the world, she said. Told me he was separated. That he would divorce soon. He bought me gifts with someone else's money. I didn't know. I didn't know the wife existed until I saw her picture in the paper. She turned her face to me then, full of apology. But I only nodded. Because I didn't need her guilt. I needed her truth. By the time Louise rested her case, the courtroom buzzed with a quiet, trembling tension. Richard's team scrambled, trying to build a defense out of splinters. It was pitiful. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was sharp and unyielding. There is a disturbing pattern of financial abuse, dishonesty, and manipulation evident here, she said. Not only toward your wife, Mr. Calloway, but toward the court, your business associates, and the law. A pause. I am granting a full freeze on your remaining assets, effective immediately. Your wife is entitled to half the estate, including those hidden through corporate deception. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Richard's face went white. I didn't move. Didn't smile. I just breathed. The judge wasn't finished. You will also be subject to further investigation under the Economic Crimes Act. Should there be any attempt to tamper with evidence, the court will take it as obstruction. Richard's mouth opened. Then closed again. Because there was nothing left to say. We exited the courtroom in silence. The press was waiting, flashes blinking like lightning. I didn't speak to them. I walked straight to the car, heart pounding with something unfamiliar, peace. Not triumph. Not victory. Just the soft, still quiet of knowing it was finally done. But I knew there was one more move left to play. And I was ready. 3 weeks passed. The frost had settled across Oxfordshire, dressing every rooftop in icy lace. I had moved into a small cottage just outside the village, nothing grand, but peaceful. It overlooked a quiet stream and had a wood-burning fireplace that filled the rooms with warmth and the scent of pine. And yet, peace did not mean stillness. My final move had taken shape. It began with a parcel, wrapped in cream paper, sealed with gold wax. Each one addressed with the kind of delicate precision Richard used to reserve for exclusive clients. I had sent 30 invitations. Not for a party. Not for a press event. But for a celebration he would never understand. The card inside read: You are cordially invited to the celebration of freedom and truth. Join us for an evening of music, stories, and new beginnings. It would be held at Farewell Manor, yes, the same estate Richard once bought to impress investors. After the trial, it had been liquidated, purchased at a discount by a developer who had always hated him. One phone call, a favor from a friend, and I had secured it, for one night only. Every guest had their reason to attend. Every one of them had been used, betrayed, discarded by Richard. Old clients, former assistants, women he left behind, even his estranged cousin whom he once scammed out of inheritance. They came. Dressed in black, with eyes bright and full of anticipation. Louise arrived first, her heels echoing across the marble entrance. Imogen followed, bringing laughter and champagne. The woman from the trial, Ava, walked in last, clutching a small book of poetry. She said nothing, but her eyes met mine, and in that shared silence, there was a bond far deeper than words. I stood before them all in the drawing room, now cleared of all of Richard's signature vanity. I didn't gather you here to celebrate pain, I began, my voice steady. I gathered you to honor what came after it. The strength that rises when truth is spoken. The peace found in reclaiming what was taken. Tonight isn't about him. It's about us. A soft hush fell. Then, applause. Tears shimmered. Glasses clinked. And just as the clock struck 9, he arrived. Of course he did. He had received one of the invitations too. I had ensured it. He walked in through the wide oak doors, confused, underdressed, expecting something else. Maybe a truce. Maybe a trap. What he saw was a room full of the people he once shattered, smiling, healed, thriving without him. He froze. His eyes darted across the faces, landing finally on mine. I didn't flinch. He stepped forward, lips parted, as if to speak. But Ava beat him to it. She rose, crossed the room, and handed him the book of poetry. He looked down, puzzled. There's a poem on page 17, she said, softly. Read it when you're alone. And then she turned away. One by one, the room did the same. They turned their backs. Not in rage. Not in hate. But in closure. He stood there, alone, in the middle of a grand room that no longer belonged to him, filled with lives he no longer had power over. I didn't need to say anything. Because in silence, I had already said it all. Later, when the music played and the fire crackled, I stepped out onto the balcony. Snow had begun to fall, soft and quiet, like peace. I smiled. Not for revenge. Not for justice. But for myself. Because after everything he'd taken, he never took me. And he never will again.